Hello, and welcome to the lecture on cell membranes. And so here is a couple of pictures that should look familiar. This is our phospholipid, which is what is used to build the cell membrane. Here's our lipid bilayer, and this right here is what we're talking about. These are all of the phospholipids that make this boundary for the cell. So remember, we're not going to call it a cell wall because a cell wall is something else. This is a cell membrane, and so these phospholipids create this boundary, and they allow or regulate what materials can go into and out of the cell. So this cell membrane is very important because it is used to determine what can go into and out of the cell. So let's first take a peek right here. So all cells have cell membranes, regardless of whether or not they have a cell wall. Some cells have cell walls, so plant cells and bacteria cells have cell walls. But animal cells have cell membranes only. So remember, these are two different things, and the membrane is used to regulate what goes into and out of a cell. It is very important. And for a cell, and for an animal cell, it's also used as the boundary. And so let's look at the different parts of a membrane. These were green. They look yellow now, but I colored them in green. These are the phospholipids. And so you can see we have the phospholipids create the boundary. And here in red, we have protein channels. So they allow certain molecules into and out of the cell. And here's another one. And then we have carbohydrates. So these blue things on the outside, these are carbohydrates, and they're used for communication. So let's look a little bit more deeply at this. So these phospholipids, these are very important molecules, and they're very special because remember, they are both water-loving and water-fearing. So the bottom half of a phospholipid is water-fearing. Those fatty acids, those two fatty acid tails on a phospholipid makes it water-fearing. However, on the top of this molecule, it has a phosphorus, and it makes it water-loving. And so a phospholipid is different from a triglyceride. Remember that triglycerides, that makes up the oils, the fat that's in us, or the fat that we eat when we eat bacon. Those are all triglycerides. And remember, triglycerides, T-R-I, they have three fatty acid tails. And they don't have that phosphorus at the top. And so their whole molecule is water-fearing. But this phospholipid is different. It has two fatty acid tails, and it's both water-loving and water-fearing. This is really important because it explains how it can be used for a lipid membrane. So since there is water on the outside of a cell, so our bodies are made of 80% water, and so there's water on the outside of our cells. And so what this means is that the lipid or the phospholipids are going to turn their water-loving heads towards the water. But then they're going to turn their water-fearing fatty acid tails away from the water. So here, it forms this outside boundary because all of those phospholipids are turning their fatty acid tails away and their water-loving heads towards the water. But then there's also water on the inside of the cell. And so that makes the phospholipids on the inside of the cell turn their water-loving heads towards the water and their water-fearing tails away from the water. And so what this does is it forms a lipid bilayer. This should make a lot of sense. A lipid, because these are lipids, phospholipids, Bi is the prefix for both, for two. So a lipid two-layer, so two layers of lipids. And so all cell membranes have two layers of lipids, or a lipid bilayer. And so you can see that this water-loving, water-fearing part of the molecule is very important because it kind of gives them a directionality. And so cell membranes are selectively permeable, meaning only things can pass through. So when we think about selectively permeable, let's think about a colander. A colander is going to let small things like water pass through, but it's going to stop the big things like spaghetti. And so it's selectively permeable based on size. And so here, our lipid membranes, or our lipid bilayers, or our cell membranes, they all mean the same thing, are are selectively permeable. Not necessarily, a little bit on size, but based on things that are charged, meaning if they have little magnets on them or if they don't. So they use these carbohydrates on the outside as communication. So this will tell the cell, let's say another cell bumps into it or molecules on the outside are interacting with it. It tells the cell on the inside what's going on the outside, sort of like an antenna. And so these carbohydrates are going to be used to open or close these channels, these protein channels. So these protein channels allow molecules to pass through. And so here, this protein channel is going to allow molecules to pass through freely. Well, this one, you can see, has a different shape and it's closed. And so this carbohydrate is going to indicate whether or not this one should open or close, or whether this one should stay open or should allow more molecules through. And so we say that carbohydrates are used for communication. They tell the cell what's going on the outside of the cell so that it can regulate what's going on in the inside of the cell. And those protein channels allow things to pass in and out. And so some molecules, or some of these protein channels right here, they require energy to open and close. So this one is just going to, it's going to require energy to move things in and out because it has to open and close. While some other protein channels, see how this one's just open? It's going to allow things, it's going to allow molecules to just pass in and out freely. And so an example of this would be like an aquaporin. So aquaporins are very small gated channels that allow water into and out of a cell. And if you want more water in there, we'll put more aquaporins. And if you need less water in your cell, you put less aquaporins. And so what is it that allows molecules to flow into and out of this cell? Well, that is, since it's not going to take energy from the cell, it's not going to require energy from the cell, it's basically just molecules flowing. So we're going to be talking about this a great deal soon. This is diffusion. So molecules bump off of one another and they end up taking up more space and a greater amount of space. They move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. This is called diffusion. And this is one process that allows molecules to pass into and out of the cell. But we're going to talk about that quite a bit more later on. But this is why we need to understand what the cell is made of in order to understand how materials pass in and out. So we have to understand that some molecules require energy in the form of ATP, but don't worry about that molecule yet. We'll talk about that later, but it requires energy to open and close those gated channels. But sometimes molecules can just pass in and out. So we talked about cell membranes. Let's quickly talk about cell walls, remembering that these are two different things. So cell walls occur on the outside of the cell membrane. So this right here is the cell wall of a plant cell, and this right here is going to be the membrane. You can see how that membrane is pushed up against that cell wall. And so these cell walls are very important for structure. They give a plant structure. So this plant doesn't have a skeleton, but it does have cell walls. And so it provides the plant with support. And so how does it do that? This is pretty cool. This is why you need to water your plants. If you see this healthy leaf cell or plant cell, there's lots of water on the inside. And that pushes that cell membrane up against that cell wall really tight and pushes out those cell walls. It makes it really firm or rigid, and so that it gives a plant structure like this. But if you have a plant cell that does not have as much water and those cell walls aren't pushed outwards, they kind of clump, they kind of move inwards, and they become wilted. And so this plant hasn't had enough water, and so its plant cells look like this. And it doesn't have enough water to push it out and give it structure. And so the plant becomes wilted. So water is very important. And so here, let's talk about the why plants have plant cells and why animal cells don't have cell walls. So here, this plant cell has those cell walls, and so that allows it to hold more water because that water pushes out and pushes against those cell walls to give it structure, make it hard. Whereas an animal cell, if it had that much water in it, it would rupture, it would blow up because it doesn't have that cell wall. It just has that membrane, and so if you put too much force on it, it's just going to break apart. And so it's really important that plant cells have cell walls, but it's also really important that animal cells don't. So that is the lecture on membranes and cell walls. And remember that cell walls in plants are made of fiber, and that's how we get our fiber when we eat our food. When we eat plant cells, like celery or any plant, that's how we get our fiber, because it is plant cell walls. Okay, I hope this helps, and I hope you have a great day.